We often try to connect our sponsor to our movie of the week in clever and possibly even funny ways. But today is the anniversary of a solemn occasion. Our movie of the week is about one of the worst days in American history, so we'll do some connecting, but also play it straight this time, mostly straight. But we do have some business to conduct with you, so we'll let you know about the goodness of Sparkplug Coffee. They have the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in our home and native land, i.e. Canada. They've got decaf and half-calf, and they can offer you many blends and roasts. They'll even let you shake things up because they offer many seasonal blends. If you're Canadian, like I just made clear that we are, you're going to get your orders delivered for free. Americans will have to shell out for shipping, but both Canadians and our neighbors to the south will get what they want within a week of placing their order. But you know what? You should be a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. That'll get you perks and deals that some casual purchaser isn't going to get, and you'll save money on every order. You can also customize to get your orders when it suits you. So if you were planning to fly across the country on a beautiful September morning and didn't want packages waiting on your porch while you were away, then you can pause your membership or even cancel it. That's why this is so not a Coffee of the Month club. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is what your fingers ought to be typing, because using our HYES promo code will save you 20% off your very next order. You're keeping money in your wallet while getting something delicious. Everybody wins. Well, we're now going to talk about a movie where nobody really wins. Well, maybe a few people did, but that doesn't mean that this is an incredible achievement in filmmaking. So let's roll.
And action! Have you ever seen
United 93? Hi there, film fans, and thank you for downloading, streaming, or somehow being part of the audience for the 535th edition of Have You Ever Seen? Could be YouTubing, of course, too. This podcast goes back into the past and sees what's what with classics from long ago. And we spoil those classics. This isn't that long ago, but still, it's been a while now, 2006. I'm the ordinary man who thinks of himself as a leader, but not in a crisis. Ryan Ellis. I would have crumpled on that plane. And here's the lady who would take it upon herself to ground every airplane in North America if you were worried that many more of them would be turned into weapons. My wife, Bev.
That's me.
That was a historic decision by Ben Sliney, his first day on the job, which is why he's being applauded when he walks into the control center in New York. And that was something that no one could have fathomed doing, but it was obviously the right move. And I've always said, well, at least to you, how many more terrorists were grounded before they could do some other damage to all kinds of other things beyond just Washington and in New York?
People very much didn't know what was going on. When it was over, we didn't know it was over. And it got both you and I to wondering, maybe there were some failed missions that we just never learned about, and they just never hijacked the plane, they chickened out, or things just didn't line up perfectly, or like...
The plane was delayed,
or the plane was
Flight
delayed.
93 was delayed.
Yeah. There's so many little things that could have gone wrong, and it makes you wonder, if the CIA ever found out about that, would they tell the public, or would they have even known about it?
Some of those guys may be in Guantanamo Bay right now.
Exactly.
Or died there, or maybe they wanted to be suicide bombers or something like that in another mission. We saw Come From Away on stage a long time ago, and I think it's also been turned into a movie, a filmed play, basically, I guess, right? And that's such an uplifting thing, because one of the planes went to Gander, Newfoundland, where there's maybe, 50 people in the whole town. They've got a whole plane they take care of, and that's a great story, but it does make you wonder. Planes that were grounded all over the place, including a lot of them in Canada, did you have terrorists that didn't complete their mission, and were they just sitting there sweating? I think there's a movie there as well. Now, I'm all speculating. I've never heard that's true.
No, we've never heard that. This is not like a conspiracy theory podcast, but... it does make you wonder what we don't know also happened that day.
Yeah, so Sliney may have saved a lot more lives. I'm sure he did, actually. I like to believe he did. Well, I don't like to believe, but I think he did.
Talk about a tough decision, though. On your first day of the job, or on your year 10 on the job.
And also hours in. This isn't 4 p.m. This is about 10, 11 a.m. Okay, the coming attractions trivia for United 93 plays into all this. The passengers on Flight 93 that crash landed in Pennsylvania were heroes for attacking the terrorists on that plane and stopping them from flying into which target?
The Capitol building, which we don't actually know for sure. That was a guess on the part of the filmmakers, a guess on the part of the 9/11 Commission, I think, as well, which was where a lot of the source material for this film came from. They just went ahead and hazarded the guess, and he has a little picture that he puts on the...
Because he forgets what it looks like.
I know.
A lot of things look like that. I better narrow it down. I guess his name is Jarrah. Did I get their names down? I'll scroll down the IMDb here to the terrorist actors, the 4 of them. Where are they here? I didn't write their names down.
I usually try to get characters' names right, but this is one movie where I'm going to be talking about a lot of that guy.
Well, true.
Because I don't think even
there are
as
no
the audience
stars.
member, there's no stars. There's also no star of the film. There's no character that we follow specifically. They don't really have arcs. Roger Ebert described it pretty well. He said, "We know about as much about the crew and passengers as we would if we were a passenger on that plane. They're strangers, and everything you learn about them, you learn through the context strictly of what's happening to them in that moment."
And a few hours, too.
Yeah, and so you can hear snippets of their conversations on the phone. You might learn here and there how they are with small talk. You might be able to gather something about their relationships with one another, but for the most part, they're strangers. That's true about almost every big scare quote character in this film. It's such an interesting approach, and it really works.
Incidentally, I'm going to try not to rant and rave, as I have during the other 9/11 related podcasts we've done over the years. But some things will need to be said today. If you're a George W. Bush apologist, even now, then thank you for giving us the past 5 minutes or so. Maybe just go do something else with your day after this point. You won't like this episode.
If you actually really do enjoy the part where we dish about the state of the world back then and what we think of all of it, listen to our Fahrenheit 9/11 podcast.
Or Zero Dark 30. Or even Bowling for Columbine.
But I think we never get into it more than we do with Fahrenheit 9/11.
Oh, of course not.
Or we talk specifically about 9/11 because that's such a political movie. We really gave ourselves permission to go nuts. But I think this movie deserves a more straightforward approach because of
it took one.
its own straightforward approach. Yeah.
All right, Fuck Those Terrorists was released by Universal Pictures on April 28th, 2006. It's funny, actually, the movie doesn't really make it seem like we should fuck those terrorists because even they are treated with a certain amount of respect and
curiosity and
maybe even empathy. They're scared too, especially the lead guy. Okay, it cost about $15 million to produce and wasn't exactly a phenomenon here at home, but made 76 million smackers worldwide. So that is a success, no matter how you look at it. The movie is, 17 years old. Well, no, the event is 22 years old, but the movie is 2006. I can't do the math.
It's 17 years old. You had it right the first time.
So please give us a skinny on United 93.
So this film depicts the events of September 11th, 2001 from the perspective of the FAA, various control towers, the military, but mostly the crew and passengers of Flight United 93, the only hijacked plane to fail in its mission that day. That we know of. Thanks to the passengers who, facing certain death, turned on their hijackers and thwarted their attempts to reach their fourth target of the attack.
Let's roll. I love that part. That's
so understated.
Todd Beamer was quoted as saying that. So he must have said it on the phone to his wife, I guess, if they even know that. Maybe they made that up. Maybe Bush. That was the State of the Union in 2002. My fellow Americans, let's roll, in the words of Todd Beamer. But in the movie, nobody's on the phone anymore. And his whole thing is, what are we doing? Let's go. Let's roll. I love the fact it's so nothing, really. It's just a line as part of this whole getting amped up thing. And he's not even the lead guy. It's actually really more Thomas Burnett, the Christian Clemenson character. Okay, in a nutshell, got a few here. We're not going to try to be funny too much today, like I said in the coffee sponsorship, but the nutshell is almost always aimed to be a little funny. So, if we as a society would have just gotten over our obsession with cutting boxes, none of this would have happened.
Obsession with cutting boxes. I can't get enough of it.
I like to cut boxes. Or, I don't think I could be a terrorist. I don't like making a scene.
Well, maybe that's this guy's problem. He was just like, oh, everyone's going to look at me.
The lead guy, yeah. The other three guys are fine with it. Yeah.
Probably the biggest reason why this mission failed.
Because they're so far away. They shouldn't be in Pennsylvania.
We don't really know. This movie tried its best to be accurate. They got a lot of witness accounts where they could.
They had the black box.
They had the black box, but they didn't have the transcript from the black box yet. That had not been made public.
Okay.
So they had everything they could learn from the 9/11 Commission.
In less than 5 years, when the movie came out.
Yeah. It was all public information, and they used that as their source material. They probably could fairly accurately gauge what was going on in those air traffic control towers and at the FAA and with the military. That stuff is probably pretty safe to say it was relatively accurate, although Ben Sliney, the head of the FAA, who on his very first day decided to shut down all air traffic, played himself in this movie incredibly. Yeah. First, he was hired just as a consultant, and then they were like, oh, let's give him a small part as an air traffic controller. And he was, I guess, so good at it that Paul Greengrass, the director, asked him to play himself. And he does a pretty seamless job. Like, he's a very naturalistic actor.
A lot of these people are real people playing, I think maybe not, I guess they're playing themselves, but they're playing real people.
Well, they're air traffic controllers playing air traffic controllers. One of the flight attendants was a real flight attendant. Yeah. It adds so much to the verisimilitude, which is this movie's main strength. Documentary-like realism.
I feel like you're there.
But Ben Sliney said that while a lot of the stuff that happened in his scenes was very accurate, he's like, the thing that wasn't accurate is that they weren't yelling, they weren't being dramatic about it, they weren't arguing about things. He's like, everybody actually was very calm and spoke really quietly. They were taking it incredibly seriously.
In that job, that's what you're like.
Yeah, probably. I mean, how else could you do that job if you aren't cool under pressure?
We talked in Apollo 13 about how Jim Lovell said in the commentary of that, Houston, we have a problem. Was more, Houston, we've had a problem. And also them fighting on the aircraft out in space didn't happen because these are the kind of people that have to prepare, and they do, for years, for all kinds of problems. They didn't foresee this one, but they're the kind of people that are cool in any circumstance. And I think maybe air traffic control people, military people, and everybody in the Sliney office there that obviously faces New York City, they see with their own eyes the smoking tower. It's not, well, they see it on TV too, but they actually see literally across the harbor, I guess it is, the smoking tower. These are the kind of people that would see that and think, that's bad, but okay, well, I'm back to being a robot. Which in that case, you almost want somebody who's more of a robot than somebody, oh my God, what do we do?
Yeah, and I think that, oh my God, what do we do person is never going to be elevated to a level of leadership in that particular job. But, of course, it's a movie, and while it appears to be incredibly realistic, that is something where they took some liberties. You talked about how the let's roll. The reason we know that is because somebody's meant to have overheard him say that while they were on the phone with one of their loved ones.
Oh, so it wasn't his wife, it was somebody else's loved one.
Yeah, somebody heard him say it, or he just said, let's roll. It was...
Not this dramatic, hands on the hip Superman, my fellow Americans, let's roll.
Well, okay, let's talk about your impression right there. That is the movie that you would expect Hollywood to make about this event.
That's what Bush and the Republicans made Todd Beamer out to be as well.
That's what Americans would have loved to see, is these heroes, these American heroes on a plane taking down the mean... They are 100% heroes. As a matter of fact, I was way more moved by the heroics of these average people who had tons of doubts, who didn't know if they were doing the right thing, who when the time came, they had made the decision to do it. Doesn't he say, let's roll, and then they still pause? They are hesitating. We thought it was such an elegant move in the script that the terrorists hesitated. And that's probably why the mission failed, because they waited too long. They were too chicken to just get the ball rolling. And then the passengers hesitated because they were afraid. You talk about how you're like, I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it. I would be in the very back seat, curled up in the corner.
I could maybe follow somebody else. I don't know if I'd be the leader. I've been a leader in my life, I think, in many circumstances, but maybe not so much this. If I was part of it, I could maybe do that, but I couldn't lead it, I don't think.
Could you break someone's neck with your bare hands?
I don't know.
He did.
Well, I've said it many times since, the whole way that they've had us go through such shit to get on a flight, still now, over 20 years later. I don't blame America or really any country for doing that because of what happened on this day. Locking the cockpit door, that was a simple one. The federal marshal thing, which I think are on all American planes, those things are all good measures. But I think even now, 22 years later, as of the day we released this podcast, if somebody stood up, and I hate to say this, but especially if they looked like the guys in this movie, the terrorists, and did anything weird, that motherfucker's going down.
Yeah, these guys are exhibiting so much strange behavior that if they were on a plane, even still in 2023...
Our grandmothers might act.
Everybody would be so keyed up if they saw anybody behaving like that, but especially if they saw, Middle Eastern men behaving strangely like that, getting up, talking to each other, being really nervous, and they're obviously up to something, but nobody would have been on high alert back then.
No, of course not.
The first act is great. The third act is outstanding.
And by the way, one quick thing about the whole let's roll sequence. I forget exactly when it starts, where we don't ever leave again. We never see Sliney. We don't see the military again. We don't see anybody else. No documentary footage. Sorry, not documentary, but real life footage they put into the movie. And we're only on the plane. But it's around the time when the leaders of the attack are in the back, where the stewardesses would always be. Get all the weapons, and we'll gather this around. And then, of course, let's roll and all that. And then we don't cut away again. The music gathers, they gather themselves, and they attack. I don't think it's that long a sequence. It might be about 10 minutes around the plane, but for the most part, we're pretty balanced. You said the majority of times on the plane. I think it's actually very balanced. We see a lot of the military guys, the NORAD people. what is it, Fitzy, what's his name again, Jonesy, one of the guys that's always been asked what's going on. The blonde woman. I love the way she reacts, by the way, when she sees, because it's on TV, when the
Beautiful
second plane hits.
Yeah.
She doesn't panic at all. She's obviously very qualified, but sir, okay, back to my job. It's only a few seconds, but something like that being rattled even that much is a big deal. But we don't see any of those people again when we're on the plane around the attack time. I think that's one of the best things about this whole movie is that we focus on that when it's time to focus on that.
Her little performance there are so many brilliant little performances in this movie. It's really something to behold. So she has a little, gotta do my job now. There's a million little times in this movie that somebody is experiencing the scariest thing in their life, the scariest day on their job, the most impossible decisions to make.
No leadership.
And they have a moment of sheer panic, and then they just get to work. I really believe that's a true illustration of heroism. And if you had the movie with a movie star, if it was Mark Wahlberg on that plane, he always says, if I was there, whatever. Wouldn't that be perfect casting to have him flex his muscles until his shirt rips off and kill the guy with one punch and be the whole all-American hero and the music swells and everybody is saved. We have a Hollywood superstar here. And even like a sentiment that I remember about that week of 9/11 when everybody was so shocked and horrified by everything that had happened. A lot of people have the sentiment, where was the superhero or the Bruce Willis? Where's our action hero? We've seen this scenario a million times in movies, only the good guy wins and saves the day. But one of the most shocking things about 9/11 was, no, there was no hero. Nobody came and saved the day. The bad guys won.
One of my favorite things in Superman Returns, even though it's not a great movie, is when he's at Ground Zero. That came out 2006 also. Lois Lane, I guess, stumbles across him, but I've only seen that movie once. I forget how that played out. But she says, where were you? Where were you? Because he's off trying to find his roots in space with Krypton having exploded. So understandably, Superman's doing something else. That's their storyline. But where was he? He would have obviously frozen the towers. They would never have gone down. People still would have died. Would have been terrible. The second plane still might have hit. But we wouldn't have lost the towers. And we wouldn't have lost as much faith as we did. Okay, let me give the numbers. We'll get back to the conversation. There aren't that many of them anyway. Rotten Tomatoes critics are pretty strong. 90%, 9-0. Like the movie. 8.2 out of 10 is the average. There are 211 reviews on the site and 83% of audiences. It was 96th at the 2006 U.S. box office. The Departed, the Best Picture winner, was 15th. We covered that before. Little Miss Sunshine was 51st. We covered that also. And Children of Men was 89th. So all three of those are in the archives somewhere. Departed was 2 years ago, I guess. Little Miss Sunshine was also. United 93 was nominated for 2 Oscars. Paul Greengrass was up against the unbeatable Scorsese for Best Director. Still one of my favorite speeches and moments of all time, but he was one of the candidates for the award. And Claire Douglas, Richard Pearson, and Christopher Rouse were nominated for their editing, which also went to The Departed. Thelma Schoonmaker won her 3rd Academy Award that night, which was a good choice too. But I think maybe in a lot of ways this maybe should have won even more so than that. And one more thing I'll say about plot is I had this as my #1 movie of 2006. When the credits rolled, I saw this in April, maybe early May. I didn't move for a while. You, Bev, had never seen it before a few days ago. I guess you've given a lot of your thoughts already. We're deep in the podcast, but continue on with your thoughts now.
Oh, it's remarkable. I was blown away. I think it may be the most successful piece of cinematic realism I've ever seen. And it accomplishes this near impossible task of making a film about 9/11 without remotely getting into the weeds of politics and the whole international context. But beyond that, it is one of the most gripping movies I've ever seen.
And 17 years after it came out. You're not watching this one I did, which was not that long after the event.
I wonder how I would have reacted to it then, because watching it 17 years later after it came out and 22 years after the event, it really put me back in that time and place. It's easy to forget what it felt like that day when there was no context, when we didn't know.
I haven't forgotten.
I don't even think I heard the name Osama bin Laden
that was later
until
that night.
September 12th, right?
It might have been later that night.
And people didn't know it was terrorists. They didn't know that it was foreign terrorists. The first thought I had was domestic terrorists because Timothy McVeigh. When I thought of terrorists back then, like it is now, you think of domestic terrorism as a much bigger threat. I was obsessed with Fight Club at the time, and I thought that somebody would have gotten ideas from Fight Club. Oh, we'll just take out the World Trade Center and then it'll mess with capitalism. I really thought that would have been a motivation for attacks like this. Even though we lived in a very safe place at the time, we were very removed. We're not even American. So in fairness, of course we have a dog in that fight in the same way that the entire world had a dog in that fight, but also because these are our very close neighbors. I have a lot of compassion towards Americans the same way I do about Canadians.
But we're also in the biggest city in this country. If they were going to attack every country, they'd be coming here too. Here's my story. I had to walk to work that day. I worked 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. doing audio. The job's really
at the
changed.
news, right? You worked
doing news.
Yeah.
I've always done news, and I've worked there since '98. I set up the board, make sure it would work. I didn't touch it again the rest of the day because Peter Mansbridge and the National were on from something like 10 in the morning until the end of the night. I'm just watching all this stuff go on. But as I'm walking downtown on this, as I recall, hot September 11th, so it's still really the summer, effectively, early afternoon, perfect blue sky. I always remember that, too. When the towers go down and that one shot shows the second one go, you don't see the smoke yet, of course, because it has to go all the way down. You just see this blue sky and nothing. I think of birds flying by. Just perfect blue sky still at that time of day. Well, that was still early in the morning. Anyway, I'm walking to work around 2:30 in the afternoon, watching the CN Tower thinking, is that thing going down? As I walk right towards it, because where I work is not far from it, I'm also walking past the banking sector. Am I walking into my own death? It wasn't likely at that point in the day, but I didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And also, apparently, my dad said to my mom when they saw on television, they were watching on the Hamilton TV station, and they saw the plane hit live. I was still asleep. My roommate woke me up to see all this stuff. But my dad apparently said, that's terrorists. So you said nobody knew. Apparently he was right in guessing that it was.
We all knew it was nefarious, and you would call it terrorism no matter what. As soon as you saw there were 2 planes, and you're like, well, obviously this is organized. This isn't just one crazy person that flew a plane into a building. But everybody knew that morning that the world had changed forever. But we had no idea how it was going to change and
Bin
what
Laden
was
won.
going to happen.
Bin Laden won because America freaked the fuck out. 22 years later, they're still freaking the fuck out.
Yeah, well, this is the political part. It was a really successful act of terrorism. We still live in a certain amount of terror 22 years later.
Apparently the main headline in some Iranian newspaper, one of Americans' boogeymen for a long time, since 1980? Their headline was, we're all Americans now.
Yeah, they had
and
a
that
vigil
motherfucker
that day.
blew that in weeks. And his fucking bullshit Karl Rove, Dick Cheney, all these people blew that within weeks. The whole world might really, truly, I know this is pie in the sky, but it might have been united. And those sons of bitches saw an opportunity, and they fucked it all up. And maybe that's one of the reasons we're in the place we are now. Because if Iran thinks that, wow, they had a candlelight vigil that night. Anyway, go ahead. I'm going to need to take
I've lost my train of thought.
I have been mad about that and almost cry about that so many times because we don't ever unify in the world about anything. For centuries, we don't. And even this part of the world isn't about almost anything, especially the last 30, 40 years when everything's so fucking political. And even more so the last maybe 10 years when if you say the wrong word, you're canceled. But here was a moment that as bad as it was, 3,000 plus people died. And we could have maybe all bonded and maybe we could have fixed so many of the problems we have. I watched it again last night. I don't think I was thinking about this exactly, but the newsroom speech. That was not a good show. We didn't like that show very much. But I've seen it so many times. Jeff Daniels' whole, we're not the greatest country in the world anymore speech about America. And he says at one point, oh, we sure as hell didn't scare so easy. That was about 10 years later when they made that show. I feel like Aaron Sorkin's writing was about that exact thing. That we didn't scare. And yes, it's a horrifying event. In the moment, I don't blame anybody for being scared. But as time goes on, Kensans, they're coming for us. They're not coming for you. Are you fucking kidding me? Maybe they're coming for New York, D.C., probably Boston, L.A. I know they're the ones because they're liberal. They're also your fellow countrymen. We live in a huge city, too.
That's when I got introduced to politics. I was 23 when the planes hit the tower. So I was young. I didn't care. Certainly didn't care about American politics. But this event and everything that followed got me pretty deeply invested in it.
You were woke. You were awakened.
Weren't we all? I mean,
yes,
weren't we all awakened?
I was.
Yeah, and one of the things that opened my eyes and was quite the downer was the realization of how prevalent and how effective propaganda is. And I know a lot of us like to think that we're immune to propaganda, but none of us are. But seeing all the freedom fries and the Toby Keith of it all and the way that it was
childish.
Not just everywhere, but it was effective. It really worked. And people could lie to people and they could say, Iranians hate your freedom. No, Iranians were on your side. Why are you making them the enemy now? Well, you just made them the enemy by using them to rile up your base and to get
Axis
people
of evil.
to... all those kinds of things. It was horrifying to watch it in real time, and I think it cured me of any smugness that we had evolved beyond other times in history when I used to look back and go, well, people would never do that now. Of course, I've been disabused of that notion many times over since then. This is a movie that so gloriously rises above it and just tells a story refreshingly removed from all of that bullshit. I wonder what it would have looked like in 2006. This was after the second election, and I was so invested in hating Bush and hating the Iraq War, and I wonder how this movie would have hit me to just go back to that event and experience it again without all of the messiness and drama and baggage that came afterwards.
Do you know why you didn't watch this? Because I made sure to see this movie. And I picked up my number one movie in April. I thought it would be, and then it stayed that way. It still is now.
I'm sure I meant to see it. I think it was just one of those movies that came and went from theaters pretty quickly. Nobody suggested renting it. And I don't know, it just came and went. It never came on the movie channel that I subscribed to. When are you in the mood to watch the movie about the plane full of people that you know from the very beginning are doomed? Yeah. I was curious about it. Everybody said it was good. It was just one of those movies that came and went, and shame on me, I never caught it at the time. You were suggesting we were either going to cover United 93 or World Trade Center, the Oliver Stone film about firefighters trapped.
Which isn't very political at all, surprisingly.
Oh,
from
there you
Oliver
go.
Stone.
So there must have been an appetite at the time to just remove ourselves. Someday somebody's going to make a piece of art that's going to remind us of the first few weeks of the pandemic before, God, things have gotten so crazy. Oh, the world could have come together. You know, we actually had potential to come together. 2. If I ever believe that there's ever going to be a galvanizing event that could have bring the world together, again,
global pandemic.
Been disabused of this notion. There is no way. The way that it just keeps getting worse too, and that political forces are using propaganda to rile people up against each other. But it is maybe a case for movies that rise above it and can actually take you out of that mindset and just show you this incredible, heartbreaking, and moving piece of American history.
And focus on, maybe 3-4 hours of that day.
It does something that not very many films have done. I was trying to look up movies that take place in real time. This movie takes place in real time.
Well, not literally.
Okay, but it compresses 3 hours into 2.5 hours.
I guess the whole story starts at, maybe 5 in the morning with the terrorists in the hotel room.
When they're praying. Okay, fine.
And trimming their body hair. I like that notion, too. I guess that's got to be a whole thing of the virgins need, the 72 virgins are going to have us. Need my pubes looking nice. They're the first people we see in the whole film, though, are the terrorists in the hotel room.
I remember saying to you at some point, probably still in the first 30, 40 minutes of the film, ooh, I have a prediction that that's not actually one of the terrorists.
You did say that.
It's one of the passengers, because otherwise, why would the filmmakers want us to see him praying? I thought it was going to be this whole reverse. Hey, you were so racist for thinking that was a terrorist. But no, it was the terrorist. Then I was a little distressed about the way that he begins the film by depicting them praying. Even though, of course, that's surely what they did that morning. I mean, they probably did that every morning. It's Muslim tradition to pray 5 times a day.
20% of their daily praying.
Yeah, exactly. They would be praying that day more than ever.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And initially my reaction was, oh my God, in 2006, there was so much rampant Islamophobia. This is a racist way to start the movie, because you're reminding everybody, look, they're praying and then they hijacked a plane. Get it? I really thought it was an irresponsible way to depict them. Now, by the end of the film, I 100% changed my mind, because the film isn't really passing judgment on them. It doesn't feel like they're forgiving them. Obviously, these are monsters. They're terrible people. They committed all these murders. But they are true believers. And
they're scared, too. I think that's a really key point.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly why he hesitates as long as he does, but it seems to be that he's hesitant because maybe he doesn't fully believe in this mission to begin with. I think a lot of these people that did this, there was 19 hijackers. Something like 15 of them were Saudis.
Yeah.
Was never really made a big issue with anyone other than Michael Moore, I think, in his movies, and Bill Maher's mentioned it, and other people have mentioned it. But no one in government ever made a big issue because Saudi Arabia is a friend with all the oil, so we can't... Anyway, politics, sorry. I mentioned Maher. Let's talk about this, too, because a week later, his show came back on the air.
Bill Maher you're talking about.
Yeah, Bill Maher. Politically incorrect in those days. Not the show he has now. Real time. And he's the one that said about how we have been the cowards by lobbing cruise missiles from thousands of miles away. And then, Henny Penny, the sky is falling. He doesn't support the troops. His point was, this is our governmental policy to never put boots in the ground unless you absolutely have to, because of Vietnam, probably more than anything else, and even Korea for that matter. So we'll just bomb you, and bomb you. And that's compared to staying in the plane and going into the towers and trying to go into the Capitol building. And somebody apparently went to the Pentagon. I know that's a conspiracy too, but this isn't loose fucking change. So that is, as much as you may hate these people, and I do too, they're not cowards. It's not cowardly to do what they did.
They're evil.
It's awful.
But they're not chicken.
Yeah.
But again, that's a bit of propaganda. Bill Maher, who I have complicated feelings about, because I used to like him a lot more than I like him now, but he kind of hit the nail on the head. Stop lying to us. You're just blowing smoke up our ass by trying to say that these people are cowards, like, oh, we're the brave ones who are submitting the contents of our pockets and our shoes and everything every time we get on a plane, and putting all of our liquids in 3-ounce bottles and giving away all kinds of freedoms in the interest of protecting freedom. But again, we're getting political. Let's talk about the hyper-realism of this film and how successful it is and how he pulled it off, because I think it is a masterpiece of realism. Like the documentary feel of it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
There's no stars in it. There's a couple of actors that have gone on to become famous in television shows. I think he played Carl in Succession.
David Bashy, I think that's how you say his name.
And there's an actor who was in Boston Legal. Or
David. The spelling's the same of the last names, but the first letter's different. It's B-A-S-C-H-E and R-A-S-C-H-E. So he's Carl in Succession, and he was in a lot of TV shows. But David Allen, again, I guess it's Bashy, he is Beamer, the Let's Roll guy. And he was also, by the way, the year before this in War of the Worlds, which I didn't love, but that's also incredibly intense. A couple of intense years for David, I guess, Bashy. But one of the biggest names, just in the sense of being in a lot of movies, and we've covered him now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Christian Clemenson, he's Mark Burnett. He's the tall guy. I guess he's blondish, strawberry blonde. He's the one that realizes they're not going to land this anywhere. Yeah. This isn't a hijacking in the sense of, we want money and here's our collateral, your passengers. They're going to fucking kill everybody, including themselves in this plane, so we got to fight back. He was in The Fisher King. We covered that. He was in Apollo 13. He's the doctor. Flight 9, I've lost all of them. He's the one that won't let Mattingly fly because he might get the measles. He's in The Big Lebowski. He's one of the cops. And also, maybe his best role, he was Bobby in broadcast news. He's the editor, so I love that sequence so much. But he is really the leader. He's Mark Burnett. Olivia Thirlby's in this too. This was her debut. She did Juno the next year. Never became a star. She was in Oppenheimer, which you saw, and I still haven't. I hope to see it before we actually post this, but I haven't seen it as of the recording. Liza, I guess it's Liza, L-I-Z-A. Colon Zayas. Sorry about the pronunciation there. She's been playing Tina on The Bear for the last 2 seasons. She's in this too. I think she's one of the flight attendants, but I'm not entirely certain. Oh. Although I really like Trish Gates as Sandra Bradshaw. She's the blonde flight attendant. I think she's really good in this movie too. That's the cast I wrote down. There aren't really anybody you would know. Clemenson, people probably should know if they're a big movie fan because we've covered him so many times. He's been in so many big movies. And David Rashi has been in a lot of things. But I don't know who Thirlby even was. Yeah, there are 2 young girls on this plane. Is that her or is it her? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, to the way the film works that you don't really notice them. You don't recognize anybody. It's easy to forget that they're actors. There's so many beautiful, naturalistic performances in this film. I don't know how Greengrass did it. I don't know how he managed to get this enormous cast of working actors. It's a great reminder of how much talent there is out there among non-stars, among people that we don't recognize. But you have to give credit to a director for creating a set and opportunity for actors to pull off this incredible feat. I cannot think of another movie that does it better, even though he has non-actors in fairly big roles.
Yeah.
I read that he kept the crew and the passengers separate from the hijackers to create a separateness and a little animosity there.
Yeah.
And he let them improvise a lot. They actually shot it in a decommissioned plane, but it was on a platform that moved, so that when they have the plane rocking back and forth and doing all the crazy maneuvers, the actors are reacting to the actual motion of the plane. And some of them got seriously hurt.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
And that some of the blood in those scenes is real.
Oh, really?
Because the actors got hurt.
That's the one defense that Gerard, the pilot, has. When he finds out they're coming, the other guy tells him, they're coming to the cockpit. just tilt the plane.
Yeah.
Put it into a bomb.
It works.
And move, basically. And they eventually get into the cockpit. We'll get to that in a minute. But for a while, they can't because gravity is fucking with them. By the way, I love that Cheyenne Jackson, who plays Mark Bingham, he's the tall guy with, I think it's Detroit... Is it the University of Michigan?
Who's the only actor I actually recognized at first because he has those eyes. And he was a regular in season 2 and 3 of 30 Rock.
Yeah, very good looking guy. But he barely makes the flight. It's one of those things you want to say, no, man, go back. Be 40 seconds later. He might have missed this flight. He wouldn't have died.
It's like the story of Seth MacFarlane. Do you know that story?
He was supposed to be on one of these
pretty
flights.
famous late. He had a ticket for those flights, but his assistant told him the wrong time. So he got to the airport, realized he missed his flight, called his assistant, gave him an earful, discovered the flight he was supposed to be on, I think hit one of the towers.
United Airlines 11 doesn't respond. That's the first one. And we talked about verisimilitude. It doesn't get more verisimilitude-y than the air traffic control guys because they've got to be real people. I don't know what they say in their jargon in the room. How could I? But they feel so real. And the one guy especially is tracking this. They don't respond. He calls it a suspicious transmission, and then somebody decodes, they listen to the tape. I guess they must speak Arabic and hears, we have planes, and that's when they realize there's more than one.
Nobody really takes it seriously because it had been something like a decade since the last hijack.
Sliney's in a meeting with other people, I guess maybe important people that... Where is he exactly? It's in New York.
FAA.
So the FAA headquarters must be in New York then because they do see, literally through their window, the smoking tower. But he's talking with them about budget stuff and, we got this going on and that going on. It's a Tuesday morning in September, ordinary day. There's no election coming up. There's no anything really going on. We found out later that Condoleezza Rice knew that bin Laden determined to attack within the United States, but nobody responds. We'll get to that later on, I guess, the military and especially the government. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But when he hears this, terrorist, we haven't had that in a long time. They don't go, what? Terrorist? Hands on the hips, let's do something.
They don't say terrorist, they say hijacker.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, hijacking hadn't really happened in a long time. And they don't respond. And I don't think you can blame them because it had not really been a thing. But even if it was, as bad as it would be if one plane hit the tower or hit the Capitol building or hit a field in Pennsylvania or hit anything, that would be awful. But if it was one plane, you wouldn't worry about the whole world changing, as everyone said for so long. It was when we find out it's planes. Boss de planes, boss de planes. And also United Airlines 175, they go silent for a long time. They nearly hit another plane in midair. That's a sequence that's pretty powerful too. We don't see any of that. They don't show any of the planes flying. I don't think you ever see an outside shot of a plane. If you do, it's not common.
I don't think so.
In a movie about airplanes. Airplane the movie shows a lot of outside shots of the airplane.
It was probably a creative decision because this movie always really keeps us on the ground and in the presence of the people who are experiencing it. It was a $15 million budget, you said? They probably couldn't afford realistic, especially because the movie's such a realistic looking movie. They were like, well, we could do something that would look really phony and take everybody out of it.
It would.
Yeah.
Why
or
bother?
we could just stay here in the presence of these people who are actively confused, which is how a lot of us felt that day, too.
You said on the ground, but even on the plane, they're not on the ground. They're
but you know what I
tens of thousands of
mean.
feet there, but they're on the ground of the plane. We know it's a set, of course, but they still are on the ground literally. And even if you're on a plane, unless there's bad turbulence, you don't dwell on the fact that, we could easily die if we just plummeted out of the sky right now. Just a normal plane, no terrorism, no 9/11. Just the plane goes down, you're probably going to die.
Yeah. There's already so many scary associations with flying. God, there must have been so many people who could have just never watched this movie. If you have a fear of flying...
I'm guessing this wasn't airing on United Airlines and the rest, American Airlines.
Well, it's an R-rated film for intense situations and language. You talk about the air traffic controllers and how they have this jargon that they speak with, and at no point does the screenplay ever stop and say, when I say this, I mean that. There's no character that has everything explained to them so that they can be so they can be the cipher for the audience. This is a movie with a surprisingly small amount of exposition. They're making the assumption that everybody who's watching this movie knows a lot about the events of 9/11. That's a very safe assumption.
Yeah.
But nobody knows what people mean when they're spitting out jargon.
ROE. Do you know what ROE means?
No.
Rules of engagement.
Which they do say out loud because they don't know the rules of engagement.
But I think they say the first time or two, what's the ROE, sir? What's the ROE?
Yeah, and they don't explain to us what the ROE is. We're not meant to understand. It's almost like the way the terrorists speak Arabic.
They're not subtitled.
They are not subtitled. So we're kind of getting it from the passenger's point of view that we don't understand what's going on. We get the gist of what they're saying in the same sense. We kind of get the gist of what's going on in the air traffic control. They kept saying squawking. It took me half the movie to realize what squawking meant. It was just that somebody's responding when you call them on the radio. Clumsy exposition is a bit of a pet peeve of mine.
Even in good movies, it's been done bad.
Even in great movies, a great screenplay or good screenplay is always going to have a character who's the newbie that needs to have everything explained to them. You insert a journalist, you insert somebody who's their first day working here. Somebody gets to tell them everything that's going on. Famously, Inception has Elliot Page playing this character that needs to have everything explained. Most of that movie is exposition.
Yeah.
And it's entertaining, it's fine, it's interesting, it's important for that movie to have that happen.
But it's for our sake more than it is for...
Oh, yeah, totally. It's just a screenwriting technique, and that's probably a good example of it, even though that movie has way too much exposition. And here's a movie that's like, no, you don't get exposition.
You catch up, and if you don't, oh, well, fuck off.
But if you don't catch up, I think you know what's happening. So you can figure out from context clues here and there. It helps keep it more interesting if you have to work harder to keep up with the film. It makes a film more entertaining. I did say, too, at the time, and I do feel this is true, that the only mistake the film makes is that it stays in the weeds a little too long. When we're with the military, there's just so many scenes in a row that I have no freaking idea what's going on. It's just people yelling at each other from across the room.
But the key reason to show them, apart from the fact they were part of this anyway, two key reasons. One, I think they're saying the FAA is not really responding to us or giving us cooperation. Maybe because they don't know what the hell's going on either. They're trying to figure out what's going on with thousands of planes in the air.
And there's no rules of engagement. There were no
No, but that's not FAA. I'm talking about the FAA.
Okay,
right?
But the FAA would have rules of engagement for all kinds of situations as well, right?
But as for the military, the planes get scrambled into the ocean or over the ocean for some reason.
It was a mistake.
We won't talk about conspiracies other than this one little point, which is a lot of people have said, was that deliberate? I remember the phrase, stand down. I think it may have been that Loose Change documentary that fucking guy made.
That fucking guy.
I'm not saying that it's impossible that it was a stage job, but we've never heard any real evidence 22 years later.
I was fascinated by the conspiracies when they first came out, but I've been pretty thoroughly convinced that for the most part, there's nothing to it. Did people take advantage of the crisis to make themselves very rich and powerful?
Very true.
100%, but that's been out in the open. And I'm just going to take them at their word that it was a mistake. That's humiliating. That they accidentally sent the planes. I think they said the explanation was, well, they have like a decoy set of instructions for the planes because they don't want enemies to overhear and know exactly what they're doing. And they accidentally followed the decoy instructions instead of the actual instructions.
And then the capital is undefended.
Another thing about 9/11 is that probably a lot of the military was a little out of practice at all of these procedures because
that's
it had
harder,
been a very peaceful time.
But that's harder to... That's what they do, though. They practice bullshit over and over. You love Jarhead. The voiceover in that, Jake Gyllenhaal's character talks about how we do all this thing and we drink water. We do this thing, we drink water. They never really get a chance to actually be soldiers. They're trained to be over and over and over. So I don't really buy that one so much. But then here it is. You like George W. Bush even now? Well, okay, I don't. He paints, and Michelle Obama, for all of her awesome traits, seems to like that piece of shit who belongs in fucking The Hague.
Yeah, she does publicly. Who knows?
Well, still, even publicly. But then, where was the leadership? The rules of engagement is not coming from, I guess it would be, as I say, SecDef. That's Secretary of Defense. That's Donald Rumsfeld. He wasn't saying anything. Cheney was in charge that fucking day. There was a coup because the guy who didn't want the job, well, he wanted the job, but didn't know what to do in the fucking job, is reading a book to kids in Florida. And then when Andy Carter comes in and says, Mr. President, America's under attack. Oh, okay. I don't know. For all of Al Gore's faults, he reacts in that moment. For all of Hillary Clinton's faults through the pandemic, she reacts better than the fucking reality star reacts. I know I'm getting political. I can't help this. Well, they said, we don't want to scare the kids. Maybe the whole fucking country really is under attack, worse than we even saw that day. Who cares if kids are scared? They might be fucking dead in another 2 hours. Or, the president's got to go, kids. He's got other things to do. Yeah. President business.
Yeah.
Versus...
It's a dumb excuse.
The guy in charge of the whole country doesn't know what to fucking do because he didn't belong in the goddamn job.
And beyond that 7 minutes, which is very embarrassing for him, and I hope it follows him till the day he dies. Humiliating expression of how unprepared he was for the reality of that job. He then went on to disappear completely because the Secret Service just wanted to take him to a safe place. And
that may have been more on them than him.
Incommunicado. It's on them, but I'm sure that he could have made an executive decision to say, wherever you take me, I have to be able to communicate with the military. I have to be able to make decisions because the country's under attack and I am needed. That's more important than my safety right now, that there's somebody to call the shots. And you see scene after scene in this film of the military being like, Where's the president? We can't make the call. These people cannot make the decision to use warcraft.
Shoot the planes down.
To shoot the planes down, which is a decision I wouldn't wish on anybody.
No. Apparently Cheney gave that call.
Which they also didn't even listen to. I'm just not going to do it. I don't care what Cheney says. I'm not going to be the guy that shoots down American citizens.
A key point about Flight 93 is that apparently it went down when these guys and women fought back and took the plane down into that field in Pennsylvania, in Shanksville. It was down and they were all dead before anyone even knew it was hijacked. I think 93 knew about the Pentagon attack, and of course they knew about the 2 planes that hit the 2 towers. But they supposedly didn't know the plane was hijacked, meaning the military didn't know and the FAA didn't know.
How could they not have known? All those people called
We saw
their
the
family.
chaos.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Somebody's trying to get a hold of them being like, someone's on this.
I don't mean it's
plane,
hours later, but I'm talking it was at least minutes later.
It does take place pretty quickly. Between the phone calls and the plane going down, we're talking about less than half an hour.
I think it's about 10 a.m. when they died in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but it wasn't 8 a.m. when the terrorists took over or when
No.
they started making those phone calls. There was so much confusion and craziness in those air traffic control towers that one plane going incommunicado. The other thing you learn is how many planes are in the air at any given time.
Yeah.
They do a bit of exposition
Thousands.
that is necessary when they talk about the decision to take every plane out of the air and just land them wherever they are.
That's even somebody who owns a private plane, some rich person, or somebody who has one of those little,
Yeah,
I don't know, dust...
almost more so.
What do you call it? Not a dust buster.
Crop duster?
Crop duster, that's it. That we see on Independence Day that Randy Quaid flies. That probably is grounded too, I would guess, right?
Yeah, probably.
Any kind of plane, well, except military planes, are grounded, so it's got to be thousands
Yeah.
in the whole country.
Let's talk about the movie. The movie deserves it. The technique and the success of
What
it.
about when they first attack? Because the number 2 hijacker stabs a flight attendant an hour into the film, which is more than halfway through the film. And then the guy with the bomb, ends up being a fake, stabs a passenger in front of him. I don't really know why he does that. I guess just to freak everybody out, because, you know, he's
Yeah,
going
yeah,
to
they
bleed.
got to keep control of it.
Doesn't even actually kill the guy. I think he does die. Well, they all died, but I think he doesn't die from that. But maybe the point is, I'm going to freak you all out by doing anything to this
And
guy.
imagine you're the terrorist. You know that all these people are going to die no matter what. You're going to kill them in an hour anyway.
You want to scare everybody, and they all go back.
Yeah, but you have to keep control of this small group of people considering the size of the plane, too.
Yeah.
It was a very undersold plane. There was a lot of empty seats.
Which is at least good to not
Yeah,
make
yeah,
people die.
it is a mercy.
I think also you see Jarrah noticing the flight attendant talking about the knock, which is 3 and then 1, I believe it is, right? So
Yeah,
then that's
yes.
what they do. The co-pilot opens the door, and that's how they breach the cockpit in the first place, which I guess would never happen now because A, there's a lock on that, and B, there must be all kinds of procedures where it's not just, oh, the secret knock that some first-class passenger can overhear us talking about. I like that too. I guess all of them, certainly 3 of them are in first class. So at least Bin Laden and those other motherfuckers ponied up some money. They got to be in first class to do all this.
Well, they got to be close to the cockpit.
Yeah. When they actually finally do their job, it happens fast. It would shock the hell out of these people. It's still really early in the morning for all these guys and women. They got up so early in the morning to get this plane. We know what it's like when you fly at 6 or 7 or 8 a.m. You're up a lot before that. So you're probably barely awake.
Although you could get on a plane a lot quicker back then than
True.
you can now.
And it's also domestic, so it would have been less
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Like you could get to the airport 30 minutes before your flight and expect to get on that plane, no problem.
Well, Bingham barely makes it. He probably barely got the airport with 20, 30 minutes to spare. Yeah, because they were going from Boston to L.A. I like how there's a lot of God talk while they're in the process of murdering people. And that isn't really impugning the Muslims, I don't think. That's what probably would happen with Christians if they were the ones to overtake a plane.
But that's them keeping their nerve up. They have to continuously remind themselves why they're doing this. And they don't get into this in the movie at all. But they were essentially members of a cult with Bin Laden as their leader. And they were brainwashed and they were convinced this is the right thing to do. I read this great article once about how part of the reason there were so many Saudi Arabian men that were members of this group is to do with the polyamory in Saudi Arabia. Wealthy men will take 4 wives and it leaves no women. There's all these unmarried men
Really?
in Saudi Arabia. If you're not super wealthy, chances are you're never going to marry. You're never going to have a family. They're incels in a way.
So in a way, they're rebelling against their own country.
But it's not even a rebellion so much as it is an open door to martyrdom. This is a culture that respects martyrdom. And then you know you're never going to have a family. You know you're never going to have a chance to have a wife, to fall in love, to experience this important part of the spectrum of humanity. If you have that bleak idea of your future, then it's going to make you more vulnerable to somebody like Bin Laden who's going to say, well, I can give you an even more noble cause.
72 virgins. A, why 72? And B, why virgins? Can I have a few experienced ones, please? Can I have the one who knows how to fucking suck a dick, please?
Well,
another one who knows how to ride.
Wait till they discover that all the virgins are waiting for them are the other guys who could never get
Yes,
married.
right. I've heard that joke before, too.
Yeah, everyone knows that one. I've heard it's just like a mistranslation of the Quran. Also, their obsession with treating women like property and the vast amount of misogyny that takes place there. But it kind of helps explain how they could get into the mindset and how they would be vulnerable to the charms of bin Laden.
I hadn't thought of that before, that their own people, their own country, their own part of the world helped, at least. It's not just, oh, fucking America, the devil, but their own people in a lot of ways made them feel this way.
Bin Laden is Saudi Arabian, and I think he's related to the royal family, or at the very least related to some very rich
Very
and
rich man
powerful.
he was.
Yeah. So that's where the money is coming from,
Didn't
too.
die for another 10 years. 2011. Now, we covered Zero Dark 30, which is all about his death.
This came out in 2006, 5 years after 9/11. And it was the first movie about 9/11.
There was a Flight 93 TV movie, which may have been sooner.
It came out in 2006. I saw that too.
Okay.
And World Trade Center, did it come out at the same?
06.
Now all these movies are rolling out, and I'm like, why did it take 5 years? And I think it's because even in 2006, the story very much did not feel like it was over yet. I don't think people really put a pin in it emotionally until bin Laden was dead.
The one major
2011.
movie that addressed this that I can think of, maybe there are other ones, but Fahrenheit 9/11 opens with black, but you hear the sounds of radio transmissions and the planes hitting the towers. And that was 04, so that was a couple years before this.
Oh, okay. So this was the first, I guess, scripted
Well, yeah, that was a
Hollywood
documentary. Yeah.
movie. That was a documentary about it. I don't remember when Loose Change came out. I just don't want to give that movie any more seriousness than it deserves. That day was horrible. It was crazy, but I still have this perverse attraction to anything that puts me back in that time and place. I'm very compelled by those shots, the video of the second plane hitting. I could watch them over and over again, although I never do. I like it when it's featured in a movie, or if I just happen to see it somewhere and never just look. I'm sure it'd be very easy to find these shots, but I never seek them out. It feels perverse.
Yeah.
That frisson that you feel when you're watching something horrible.
There was a fire department crew that had some kind of camera. Maybe they were making a documentary of their own. I forget now, but they had a camera, and they see the plane go overhead, and you certainly hear it. Boom, hits the tower. I think it's the very first one. I don't think we found that for a long time to come. But then, yes, you've seen the famous shot, and they show it in this movie on CNN or wherever the station was, where the second plane comes. And it comes from behind the shot, because the camera's facing the tower, the second one that's not on fire yet. And then you see the plane coming in just, 200 whatever miles an hour. Great flying. They're terrorists. They're awful people. They belong in hell, if there's such a thing as hell. But great flying. And if that really was a plane that hit the Pentagon, it probably was. Maybe even more so. Although that's a probably bigger target than the towers are. Well, when they do attack, they find out that the bomb is a fake. It's a fake. Al-Nami, that's his name, the guy who is not in the cockpit for the most part. When I was preparing this, I was calling them terrorists number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 would be the pilot, that's Jarrah. 2 would be the guy who slashes the flight attendant's throat, in the name of God. And I like how they didn't really have any gurgling sound effects or blood spilling out of her throat. That was good. I'm glad they didn't do that. And I had 3 being, I guess, just Al-Nami is his name, who is the one that in a way is in charge of the guy who's got the bomb. So he's number 4 in my mind. But they kill him. I'm going to break his arm and I'm going to get that bomb. They do that. So he's gone. Now it's Al-Nami, who I guess is actually number 3 of the terrorists in my delineation. Whatever, is that the right word? Anyway, he uses the drinks card. I like that. These guys aren't just overwhelmed that fast. They do fight back. But you've got all the people that are charging, including some of the women. It's not just the guys. It's not just Bingham and Burnett and Beamer and those guys. But they kill Al-Nami, and they use the drink cart against the door of the cockpit. They finally break through, and this is when the shots are really close. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Greengrass had already done Bourne Supremacy with, and I love that movie. It's my favorite of all the Bourne films, but the shaky cam everywhere.
For the people listening, Brian's imitating a cameraman that cannot
there
say
you go.
so. Yeah.
I'm not on YouTube right now. But yes, and he does that even more so here. But I don't think he overdoes it too much, except for this sequence, because he wants to disorient you. And the camera, as I recall, gets really close when they charge. The music just goes up and up and up and up and up. A Hans Zimmer kind of thing. Not that it's Hans Zimmer in the music.
Yeah, but it's a drone. Yeah.
And then you get these really tight shots. And when they get in the cockpit, you really don't see what's going on. You can barely tell.
Probably the same disorientation they were feeling. It is just a bit of magic. Maybe that's not the right word because it's so intense and it's such a tragedy. But this is the point of the film where I was just so intensely affected. I honestly cannot remember the last time anything made me feel as tense and invested in an action sequence.
Harold and Kumar got a White Castle a couple years ago.
So one of my favorite details is that there's the passenger on the plane who's a pilot. If we can get him in the cockpit, he can actually fly the plane.
That's Carl from Succession.
Yes. With the help of air traffic controllers, we could land the plane. We could actually live. We know the pilots are dead, but we have a pilot. And when the plane is dipping back and forth and they're really strongly affected by gravity...
He's got to be part of the charge.
Yeah, but they're trying to get him towards the cockpit. They know they're close, and you can see them physically almost trying to crowd surf him to the front of the plane and fighting against G-force and fighting against everything else that's going on. And there's so much yelling, there's so much disorientation.
No one's more important than he is.
No one's more important than he is. He's got to get to the cockpit. Of course, you know how this is going to end. But still, you're just like, oh my God, he's got to get there. And the way you can feel these people's desperation and the clumsiness and messiness of it, this is not Bourne Supremacy, where you have this highly effective, trained CIA agent. His whole shtick is that he just gets in a situation, mysteriously knows exactly what to do, and is incredibly coordinated and talented fighter. One of my favorite things in that movie is he rolls up a magazine to use as a weapon and punches with it, with the rolled up end. Oh yeah, that would really hurt. He's in a situation where he always knows how to solve the problem.
And they don't.
And they don't. And they're just desperate and they're doing the best they can. And I don't think there's any scenario where they would have succeeded. There's this controversy about the character who's the German passenger who is arguing that they should just be trying to compromise with hijackers. And he even at some point is so devoted to the notion that they can appease them that he stands up and is like, oh, they're trying to turn against you over here.
Why isn't he British? There'd be a great commentary on the Second World War leading into it. Oh, we just have to appease Hitler. Oh, and he won't actually do anything terrible.
You think if this really was a political film, they would have made him French, right? Because,
also true, yeah.
In 2006,
maybe more so.
France was enemy number
Freedom
one.
fries.
Like Britain actually did take part in the Iraqi war, so they would never make him British, but they made him German.
You said appeasement, though, so I'm thinking about back in the World War II
appeasement.
Era.
He is the appeaser. And that was a little bit of a scandal in the film. His widow wouldn't cooperate with the film. Some people criticize the film for that reason.
I don't blame anybody for not knowing what to do in this situation.
I feel like I would be the passenger, but they're like, can't we just talk to them? Because even if you think about it, what would you have considered the likely scenario in a hijacking? When you picture hijacking in 2001, you would probably picture a lot of procedural network dramas where the hijacker always gets talked down by the hero.
The last thing they're going to do is crash the plane. Look at Air Force One. We covered that last year.
Yeah.
The last thing they want to do is crash that plane. Look at that great sequence when they're in Germany and we're rooting for the Russian terrorists to get the plane back in the air because we want more movie. And it's exciting. Yet if the plane stays on the ground, the movie's over and maybe people don't die. But the last thing they want is for the plane to crash. These guys, at the worst case scenario, and that's one thing too with Gerard and these other guys, if they went to their Valhalla, or whatever the fuck they call it, or their virgins, if they got maybe 3 virgins, I guess, they killed quite a few Americans. Not as many as they wanted to, but they killed some at least. They can't lose if you think about it, no matter what happens, unless all 4 of them were killed and the plane landed safely. That'd be the one way they wouldn't win. Here's the sick joke, and I'm going to tell you what people are like in the news game. Because I'm not saying I said this, but I always felt like it was not the guy. But my friend Mike at work said that on the day, I thought maybe it was days later. Anyway, he said that on the day, we were joking because we're dark, sick people, and we weren't doing anything. We were watching.
The news brings out some real gallows
just like
humor.
Detectives can be like this too, I guess. And we were saying about how that was deliberate. The field in Shanksville where they did crash this plane. And the idea was, nothing will ever grow there again. We're killing this field. No more corn or hemp,
take
potatoes.
That field.
You'll never grow anything in that field again.
Americans will never recover from losing this field.
Right. We're sick people, I guess.
You braced me for way worse than what that was.
I'm sure there was worse that day. One of the guys, maybe by 1 o'clock in the afternoon or at least by 3 o'clock, was saying, what the fuck? Is there anything else going on in the world right now? Because it was only that all day long. There wasn't
for like 3 weeks. Yeah. We did not return to regular programming for weeks.
Well, I was there until 11, and they started doing even sort of recaps. It was live. The National was live for so long that day. Because first, Peter Mansbridge took over what would be the morning programming, just like all the American anchors did too, and I'm sure every other country did the same thing. But then eventually the National went on as normal, and I think by 10 o'clock it was more like, okay, now this is our programming, the full solid hour with, I think, commercial breaks, maybe by then, by 11. And next morning was more of the normal programming with commercial breaks. But that whole day we weren't doing that. And this one guy saying, well, we're covering this for... Anyway, short-sightedness.
I remember I had a running joke the first couple of weeks after 9/11. Every time I would see somebody for the first time since 9/11 happened, I'd be like, oh my God, hey, how you doing? Did you hear that somebody flew a plane into the World Trade Center?
That's all anyone talked about.
And that joke, yeah, it was literally all anybody could talk about. Yeah. The only time I've ever seen anything remotely come close to an event like that was the pandemic.
Yeah. I think I talked about the cast as much as I was ever going to, so let's talk about Paul Greengrass, writer, director, and producer of this movie. Did the Bourne sequels, so Supremacy and Ultimatum, which are as good as, I think the second one's the best one of the three of them, but as good as or better than The Bourne Identity. And the third one won 3 Oscars, including for editing. He did Captain Phillips, Shaky Cam, Verisimilitude, Real Incident also. Did many with Matt Damon, including Green Zone, which I don't know if that's based on a real story. Real types of events, though, because that's the Iraq War specifically. We have a Foster, by the way, down there. You've heard her already, maybe snoring or making other noises. It is...
Sneezing fits.
Becca. I don't know if we've acknowledged we have Becca.
She's been pretty good for this whole podcast, but she's getting impatient with us now.
The producer is Tim Bevan. We've had this guy before. Is it Bevan? I should look this up. Bevan. So Bevan or Bevan. Eric Fellner and Lloyd Levin, and of course Greengrass himself. Many women were executive producers or associate producers as well. There are a ton of people producing this movie. Tim and Eric, I like that, by the way. I don't know if I ever noticed that before. Tim and Eric have 11 Oscar nominations between them. Most of them are shared, but a lot of them are crappy movies, including Darkest Hour, a movie we don't like. The film was 239-1. We watched our DVD, which looked pretty good. Cinematographer that shot the shaky cam, Barry Ackroyd, did a lot with Greengrass. Also The Hurt Locker, which we covered many years ago. I mentioned the editors who were nominated, Douglas, Pearson, and Rouse. Claire Douglas did a lot of TV. Richard Pearson did Blades of Glory the year after this. There's a change of pace. And then Rouse often works with Greengrass. And the composer with that droney score through a whole lot of the movie, but especially at the end, often worked with Paul Greengrass. And then also Shrek.
Oh my God.
That doesn't fit. Which one of these things doesn't belong? So I guess we've talked already about the look, but what do you think about the cutting and the music? And the writing? And the producing?
I say this movie's just about perfect. And I think extra points for doing something that is pretty against the grain and unusual and probably challenged a lot of people's assumptions about how a movie ought to be made and really succeeded.
What happens next? Well, apart from my sick joke about the...
What happens next, indeed? Nobody knows.
Well, the field in Shanksville, nothing will ever grow there again. What really happens next is that the Bush administration blunders the hunt for bin Laden and lies its way into the war in Iraq, and our chance to come together as a world was squandered. Good job, Dick Cheney. Good job. You old fuck. Need more money. What's it called again? That fucking company came from?
Halliburton.
Halliburton needs more money and power.
And it got it.
Our last thoughts. Your last thoughts first on United 93.
I think this film is a true work of art. It's a beautiful depiction of a terrible event with real integrity and pathos.
It's also fitting that we record this, and it's probably still going to be true when we post it, that the writers and actors strikes are still going on. They're united, and this is United. That's obviously a double meaning, because you could have called it Flight 93 like the TV movie was.
No, but United is so much better.
Because United, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a hell of a docudrama, hell of a procedural. I respect Greengrass's style, though I wonder if he needed a shaky cam to be that shaky all the time. But this feels like you're watching the real people go about their day. I love the chatter, the pilots especially. It just feels like you're sitting behind them and they're saying the boring ass shit. They do the flight attendants as well. Some of the airline passengers talking to each other. It just feels about as real as you get.
It feels like a documentary. There is so many scenes in the movie that could pass for a documentary.
I think it is the best movie of 2006. Seeing it again even more so, I think that's true. Despite The Departed, Little Miss Sunshine. Children of Men is way up there for sure. Shut Up and Sing, the documentary about the Dixie Chicks. Also a political movie.
Yeah.
But this was the best of that year. And we post it on 9/11 itself, 2023. In 7 days, we'll lighten it up a lot and go back to yapping about a comedy, as I did 2 weeks ago when I covered Mrs. Doubtfire on my own, although that was also pretty serious, but it was a comedy. Jason Schwartzman and Wes Anderson made their names when they made Rushmore, so September 18th will be the day we talk about their breakout flick that so many people love, but not me. Maybe this time?
Don't worry, guys. I do love it, so I will be defending it passionately.
It's on Disney Plus, but I think you also have the DVD. We have, but it's your DVD.
I'm sure I at least owned it at some point.
So we have options. The coming attractions trivia question for Rushmore. This will mark the 8th Bill Murray film that we've ever covered on this channel, not to mention 3 more that Chris and I talked about on my defunct sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. 11 Bill Murrays in total. The question is, what was the first Murray movie we ever reviewed, and which of any of those 10 previous flicks between this podcast and Scoring at the Movies got the strongest numbers on Rotten Tomatoes?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Rushmore. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. And if you like us, why don't you tell everybody by giving us a rating and a review? We really appreciate that. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email, haveyouvrseenpodcast@gmail.com. You can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
So one more kudos to Greengrass and his crew and his cast and everybody for making a great film. And thank you once again to the heroes in that airplane for storming the cockpit and preventing those motherfuckers from killing even more people than they did. America and the world owe such a debt to all of you.
And cut.